Kept you waiting, huh?
I'll say.
Oh, hey, Mark.
So, what's with the new caps here?
Well, one does want a hint of color.
No, honestly, it's hurting kind of under my eyes.
So get used to it. Anyway, did you want something?
Yeah, here's that thing you ordered.
Ah, thank you. Now I'm ready.
That thing barely fits you, John.
It'll stretch out.
Give me the fucking
No,
shirt.
get off! Oh boy, Metal Gear. I feel this has been a long time coming. Well, as I said before, I have a hell of a lot to cover for this marathon. This series goes back to the 1980s, yeah. Now, I'm sure a lot of people thought it started with Metal Gear Solid for the PlayStation in 1998, including yours truly. It's where I started. No, Metal Gear's origins date back to 1987 for the MSX II. I'm heading into new territory here, despite the age of the console. Well, the MSX was more of a home computer system released in 1983. This shit predates the Famicom. It was barely known in the US, but it was popular in Asian markets such as Japan. Companies like Konami, for example, thrived on it. Remember that vampire killer game I mentioned during one of my Castlevania reviews? That was released on the MSX. And for the record, I'm not going to be spending any time spewing out vitriolic hatred towards Konami. Not to say that they don't deserve it, but that's not what this marathon is about. It's about the Metal Gear franchise, the success of both it and its creator, Hideo Kojima. Ah yes, Hideo Kojima, the guy who originally yearned to be a film director but would later switch to become a full-out game designer, inspired by other developers like Shigeru Miyamoto and Yuji Horii of Dragon Quest fame, his first title being Penguin Adventure. Bet you didn't see that one coming, I sure as hell didn't. And maybe this doesn't really count to some, he was an assistant director on this one, not really the head honcho. But it's humorous to think about. In 1987, Kojima was placed in charge of an upcoming project called Metal Gear, and it was meant to be an action game focusing heavily on military combat. I'm guessing something that was packed with explosive adrenaline, something like Contra, another property of Konami. And that sounds pretty redundant now that I actually think about it. Either way, the MSX2 had a hard time rendering a lot of sprites at once, so if an action game was to happen, it was probably going to be a lag-filled, sprite-flickering mess, so Hideo Kojima decided to switch focuses. Instead of being about how high the body count was, Metal Gear became a game where stealth was important, to avoid combat as much as possible, and using the environment to your advantage, and thus the first game in the Metal Gear franchise was born. The Metal Gear franchise has a well-deserved reputation for having incredibly deep and very complex storylines, but would you believe the first game's plot is very fundamental? The West has received word that a weapon of mass destruction is being created inside a heavily fortified base called Outer Heaven. Special Forces Unit Foxhound send their best agent, called Grey Fox, to infiltrate the base and neutralize the threat, but after a few days, Grey Fox goes MIA. That's missing in action. Trust me, there's a lot more acronyms to come. Retaliating, the commander of Foxhound, Big Boss, sends his newest recruit Solid Snake to Outer Heaven in hopes of locating missing our Grey Fox, and to find out what Metal Gear is, as those were the last words uttered by the man before he disappeared. Amongst the handful of hostages he rescues and the somewhat helpful assistance of Snake's team via radio transceiver, Snake eventually finds Grey Fox alive and well. He tells Snake that Metal Gear is an all-terrain bipedal tank not only capable of close-range combat, but also capable of launching nuclear weapons to any point on the planet. So, in order to take it out before it's completed, Grey Fox informs Snake on the creator of Metal Gear, Dr. Drago Petrovich Madnar, who is also located in Outer Heaven against his will. And after infiltrating deeper into the base, Snake locates the good doctor, but he refuses to help unless Snake also rescues his daughter, who's also located in the base, so Snake makes one last detour to get the info he needs. However, as Snake embarks on these continuous rescue missions, he begins to notice Big Boss acting stranger and stranger. He deliberately offers misleading advice, leading Snake into death traps, and at one point even breaking the fourth wall, telling Snake to turn off the console. Snake rescues the doctor's daughter Ellen, and as thanks, he shares with Snake the key to destroying Metal Gear, leading to a very anticlimactic battle where Snake destroys the stationary mech before it even has a chance to activate. It's at this time Big Boss reveals his true colors. He's the commander of not only Foxhound, but also Outer Heaven, and that this entire operation was merely a ploy to ensure that Outer Heaven would be the strongest superpower in the world, using Snake to spread misinformation to the West and gain the upper hand. Alas, with a few RPGs to the face, Big Boss dies and Snake makes his escape with Outer Heaven going up in flames behind him as he walks away. See? Nothing extraordinary, especially compared to how crazy things get in the future. Well, that's the first game, so a basic story with the simple yet effective twist is all I can really ask for. And it doesn't really get any more complicated in gameplay. You move Snake with the D-pad and he can punch stuff, namely security guards when there's no alternative. It's your mission to sneak around, making sure those guards don't see you, because if they do, they call in the cavalry, leaving you with a shitload of problems. Guards won't stop chasing Snake until he either enters an area where things stop suddenly, or when Snake kills every guard on screen, which can be impossible at points. Thankfully, this being an old 80s game, there are workarounds. Every guard suffers from an extreme case of tunnel vision. As long as Snake is not directly in front of them, it's like he's not even there at all. You can be as loud as you want as well, as long as you don't detonate an explosive or fire a gun without a suppressor. You can't be as silly with other security measures like surveillance cameras or infrared lasers, not that there's no way to deal with those either. Snake can find thermal goggles to help spot any laser traps and use a simple cardboard box to blend in with the concrete walls and steel floor. Hey man, it sounds goofy, but it'll save your ass. A number of weapons can be procured by Snake through his mission, like a standard handgun to a grenade launcher. Everything has limited ammo, but ammo crates are usually plentiful. You can even randomly get them from enemies you take out with a few punches. Now, I don't fully understand the logic in this. Why is it I can only get ammo and food from guards I punch to death? Do I somehow damage the item when I take someone out with a weapon that's not a grenade? Well, every time you find a room with ammunition, you can simply leave the room, head back in, and there you go, the ammo respawns. This also goes for healing items like rations, so exploit that when you can, because you're bound to take damage at some point. This game has some bullshit. Let's start with item management, and by that I mean the goddamn card keys. These are items you slowly collect to unlock doors to further explore Outer Heaven, but the doors aren't labeled and each card is its own separate item. So this means when you got a new door ahead of you, or hell, just when you're backtracking, you're constantly pausing the game to find the right card key to open the door, and it really grates on your nerves pretty quick. Wouldn't it have made more sense if the cards stacked? I can't think of a reason not to have it that way. But this sort of design can also lead to some unfair situations, like when you're in a gas-filled room. Snake apparently can't place a gas mask around his face and hold on to a card key with his hand at the same time. So when you gotta exit the room, you have to unequip your gas mask for the card key, which means you're gonna take a bit of damage upon exiting the room. I hope you're not starving for health during these moments, because it happens on quite a few occasions. Outer Heaven is filled to max capacity with other hostages as well, often supplying Snake with clues to where he should go next, and if he saves enough of them, when he saves enough of them, Snake's rank increases, extending his life meter and the number of items he can carry. Just to save you some future stress in case you decide to play this, rescue every hostage you can. I don't feel the game emphasizes enough on the importance of rescuing hostages for me. Having a higher ammo count is necessary to kill some bosses in this game, and in a plot-related scenario, Snake's rank needs to be a certain level, and you only find this out about 3/4 into the campaign. There's this girl named Jennifer who supplies you with items you need to advance, but she won't talk to you unless your rank is at level 4, a task only achieved when you rescue enough hostages. Oh, and for the love of God, make sure you don't accidentally kill any of them. Killing one is enough to drop your rank by a whole star, and guess what? Hostages don't respawn. Kill too many, and that's a dead fucking game. But to be fair, you'd have to have serious butterfingers to get in that kind of situation, but it always helps to be careful. There's a few times where the game's also too vague on what exactly to do. The hostages only tell you so much if they have a clue to give at all. Big Boss at times will inform you of a man named Schneider, a soldier belonging to a group of resistance fighters currently at odds with Outer Heaven, and he can help you locate items needed to proceed, but the game never gives you his transceiver number to contact him. You either input every combination possible or save yourself the time and look up his contact number on the internet. Yeah, I classify Metal Gear as a guide game because there are some things I don't think an average player is logically going to do in this day and age. How about punching a security door open without the proper card key, because you can suddenly do that now, knowing the exact locations of those motherfucking pitfalls that kill you in one hit, and just knowing where to go at all. You never know when you'll run into a wall that you can blow up with C4. It's almost like finding secrets in the first Zelda game. There's a lot of back and forth, and areas tend to look like one another, classic shortcomings of a limited age. And I should note, nearly all of this applies to the NES version of Metal Gear as well. This was a port released about a few months later for the Famicom, with Americans not seeing it until June of 1988. We wouldn't get the original MSX Metal Gear until it was included in the re-release of Metal Gear Solid 3 in 2006. It's how I recorded the game in the first place, and Metal Gear 2. This right here was how most Americans experienced the original game. It's kind of faithful to the MSX version, but there are some major differences in level design and mechanics. The opening drops Snake off in a jungle via a helicopter. Beats the fuck out of me who these other people are. We never see them again after this sequence. Enemies don't drop ammo or rations when defeated with punches, so you gotta rely on finding those items scattered in rooms and refilling them via the method I mentioned earlier. Also, if you happen to get spotted, you can just leave and re-enter the current scene to end the chase, so guards here have both tunnel vision and 5-second memories. This can make the NES version easier, but the clunky programming can also be worked against you. For instance, don't use binoculars in an area you killed guards in, because the moment you put the binoculars down, the guards suddenly respawn, leaving you unfairly exposed. The NES game can be as cryptic as the MSX version for similar reasons. Item management is a colossal pain in the ass with a limited control scheme. You pause the game with select, you choose your weapon or inventory to access the menus, but now suddenly the select button is cancel and the B button does nothing. It's a fucking mess. And if you're some sort of grammar Nazi, this game's translation won't help you feel asleep at night. Honestly, I'm laughing at this kind of shit though. It's fun to be reminded of a time when proofreading and quality assurance was a luxury. There's this part where Snyder, the informant I mentioned earlier, warns you about some poisonous rooms up ahead, and as you travel along in that building, Snyder contacts you one last time about the identity of Outer Heaven's leader, but before he can reveal the name, he's killed off. But when you go back to the area where Snyder warned you about the poisonous rooms, there he is, warning you again like he never died at all. Wow, and you don't even fight the titular Metal Gear in this version. No, you blow up this giant 80s supercomputer instead, with Metal Gear taken care of off-screen because of it. I know the original fight in the MSX counterpart was just as anticlimactic, but at least you saw the fucking thing. This is just interrupting Big Boss's game of Minesweeper, and if you hold right on the D-pad as you enter this room, you can actually glitch to the next room and skip right to the fight with Big Boss. But I swear to God, this has to be the best part. Now, the NES game has a password system. It's very typical stuff, and if you want to skip straight to the end with the supercomputer and Big Boss with every weapon and item available, you type in "fuck me" on the password screen. Fuck me! They got away with that! How do you miss something like that? Hideo Kojima had no involvement in the NES Metal Gear, and he doesn't think very highly of this version of the game. I don't think either version of the game has aged well, to be frank, but back then they did their jobs, and when money's made, sequels are sure to follow. But this is where things begin to get interesting. Metal Gear on the NES was a success in North America and Europe, so in response to that, Konami made a sequel exclusive to those markets. Snake's Revenge, a title that makes no sense because Snake won last time and defeated Big Boss. There's no revenge to be had, and no, I doubt Naked Snake was even a concept in 1990, and even then Kojima had nothing to do with this game as well. But I can feel my testosterone levels building as I look at this render of Snake, now a full-fledged Lieutenant Solid Snake. God, that just sounds like something ripped out of an 80s action movie. And on that note, Snakes decided to trade in his green camouflage for some bright orange sports gear that would put Guile's army in the Street Fighter movie to shame. Slowly but surely, Metal Gear is transforming into Contra, and if you want further proof of that, Snake's Revenge has occasions where Snake travels in a 2D side-scrolling fashion. I can try to pretend stealth is a major part of this gameplay mechanic as well, but I ended up spending most of my time getting shot down by fully armored guards and electrical currents in the water. For some reason, I'm reminded of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the NES. I can't quite shake that feeling. But there's no pizza to help mend my wounds here, not even Ninja Scroll so that I can attack things with weapons worth a damn. Would a spread gun be too much to ask for? I mean, in hindsight, you can play these areas without getting detected, but that's only in hindsight. There's no way to tell what's up ahead in the next screen, like a guard who'll instantly spot you unless you enter the screen while crawling. It's like they want to make an action game while struggling to keep the stealth gameplay that defines Metal Gear. And when it comes to stealth, it works about as well as it did last time, so that checks out. And bad guys even drop stuff when you punch them to death again. They also give you a combat knife to deliver a quick, close-ranged kill, but I find this ultimately pointless. If you use the knife, you don't get potential item drops, and punching works fine as is. It stuns an enemy long enough to get punched immediately after. Maybe if you're speedrunning the game, maybe, I don't know. The environments are more varied compared to last time. You go on a boat, a train, all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate that, you know, trying to liven things up. And I hate the 2D shit, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the music during those parts. These boss fights are just total bullshit on the other hand. I didn't really stress how overly simple the bosses were in Metal Gear 1. They absolutely could have been better. You can kill a lot of them just by standing next to them and pumping them full of lead, but Snake's Revenge feels like it overcompensates. As early as the first boss, you'll notice that these reek of trial and error. It's nearly impossible to avoid the rushing assault of these robotic football players. Yeah, they can't be anything but. They're fucking football players. The one I find the most thoughtless is the fight against the spy. Basically, one of your comrades gets captured in the beginning of the game, and later on you think you find him, but it turns out to be a lookalike. The boss fight doesn't start until you attempt to free him, but the moment you do, you take damage. That's bullshit. What if I was low on health? How the fuck was I supposed to know that would happen? And the actual fight is just close-quartered mayhem with a death trap right in the middle of the room. I died a dozen times to the point where I decided to just lay the fucker down with rockets in hopes that he would die before I do. Not very fulfilling boss design, and I'm aware I didn't get into the story here because what story? Metal Gear was destroyed last time, but plans for a second, more powerful Metal Gear have surfaced, and Snake is once again sent to stop it from becoming a reality. He's grouped with a team of people who have no bearing on anything and rarely show up at all. It's basically the Solid Snake show from start to finish. Big Boss turns out to be the man behind everything again, and not only did he survive his last meeting with Snake, but now he's a full-out fucking cyborg. Alright, I'll take that. Anyway, Snake destroys Big Terminator and soon runs into Metal Gear 2, where he once again destroys it before it even has a chance to do anything. A bit of the actual mech than an 80-inch monitor at least. Snake saves the day and the UN declares this as World Peace Day. Jesus Christ. I mean, Snake's Revenge as far as sequels go could have been a lot worse. The core gameplay is largely unchanged, so it works as well as it did before, but that also means if you weren't convinced earlier, you won't be convinced now most likely. And now we have these clunky 2D sections and a larger emphasis on trial and error, making Snake's Revenge more about how well you can learn from your inevitable mistakes, rather than trying to avoid problems altogether. This leads us into our final game of today's video, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Hideo Kojima got wind of a sequel being developed for Metal Gear without his involvement. I don't think he was angry about Snake's Revenge, but he decided to make his own sequel, and not to the NES game, but to the original MSX Metal Gear. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake was released for the Japanese market in 1990, almost around the same time as America got Snake's Revenge.
It's a battle of the sequels. Which one can claim dominance as Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, without a doubt?
I'm sorry, but this is clearly the better game between the two for me, and my personal favorite of the original Metal Gear titles. It has problems, but excuse the pun, it's a solid game. And that can actually mean two things here. As someone who started with Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation, I was shocked to learn how many cues it took from this game. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake lays some major groundwork for the franchise, starting with a heavier plot. The world is on the brink of facing an oil crisis. A scientist by the name of Dr. Kiyomar develops a way to synthesize petroleum-grade hydrocarbons. I think that means oil. Anyway, he calls it Oilix, and just as he was going to demonstrate its low-cost capabilities to the United States, he's kidnapped by soldiers from Zanzibar land, who plan to use Oilix to control the world's oil supply and use nuclear weapons to outright hold the world hostage. Foxhound, now led by Colonel Roy Campbell, manages to bring Solid Snake out of retirement in hopes of finding and rescuing Dr. Marv. He's joined by Holly White, a CIA operative posing as a journalist, George Kastler, who knows a thing or two about enemies of Zanzibar land, McDonald Miller acting as a survival consultant and general breaker of the fourth wall, and eventually Gustava Hefner, a woman Snake develops feelings toward in some manner, who is also the personal bodyguard of Dr. Marv and an agent of the STB. See, the acronyms just keep coming, buckle in boys and girls. Snake's trip through Zanzibar land is filled with many twists and turns. Early on, Snake faces the Black Ninja, who when defeated, turns out to be Snyder from the first game. After Snake destroyed Metal Gear, Outer Heaven was blown to shit thanks to an airstrike from NATO, wiping out a lot of resistance fighters that Snyder represented, and war orphans located in the area. Big Boss, now known to have survived the attack and is working as the leader of Zanzibar land, took Snyder in as well as the children to raise a powerful army. Before Snyder passes, he reveals the location of Dr. Marv since he feels no animosity towards Snake and thinks that's what Big Boss would want. Along the way, Snake reunites with Dr. Madnar, the creator of the first Metal Gear. Evidently, the man got kidnapped again, but is willing to help Snake locate Dr. Marv for the sake of his daughter Ellen. But the rabbit hole just gets deeper. Snake soon encounters a new model of Metal Gear, which kills Gustavo right in front of the hardened soldier, and to make matters worse, the pilot is revealed to be Gray Fox, who deserted Foxhound after the events in Outer Heaven and joined ranks with Big Boss. The former comrade warns Snake to stay away and recaptures Dr. Madnar, but Snake is not one to simply leave and manages to make his way to Dr. Marv's location, where he unfortunately discovers the corpse of the poor doctor, and the perpetrator is revealed to be none other than Dr. Madnar, who has been secretly working for Zanzibar land the whole time as revenge against those in America who shunned his scientific research. Dear God, who hasn't Big Boss swayed with his magical eye patch? Dr. Madnar is incapacitated, Snake succeeds in retrieving Dr. Marv's research for Oilix, and he runs into Gray Fox, once again piloting the new Metal Gear. Miraculously, Snake manages to destroy the towering machine and takes out Gray Fox in hand-to-hand combat after the exploding Metal Gear sets all of Snake's equipment on fire. With nothing but the scraps on his back, Snake locates Big Boss and the two have one last battle, ending when Snake uses a makeshift flamethrower to incinerate Big Boss and wipe him out once and for all. Snake escapes with Holly aboard a chopper and ride into the sunset, ending his mission on Zanzibar land. God damn, what an upscale from the first game, huh? And this is still nowhere near as deep as later games will get, but you can tell Kojima's method of storytelling begin to glimmer here. Metal Gear was very black and white on characters and story structure. Snake was the good guy, Big Boss was the bad guy, so we had to stop him. And you can probably argue the same case here, but with an abundance more dialogue added to explain details like motive and backstory, the scenario becomes a shade of gray, and we get to see actual character development that also establishes actual personalities. There were unexpected repercussions for Snake's actions in Metal Gear 1, and in Metal Gear 2, like it or not, he has to deal with them. Who were once his allies are now working against them, and it's not entirely his fault. It's the result of the kind of world he lives in, along with the harsh realities within them. Snake feels the need to thwart Zanzibar Land's plans, not necessarily for his country, but because he wants to do it on his own accord. It's who he is. He fights for himself, but he also has his own set of morals that ultimately make him the protagonist. Big Boss goes from your generic Bond villain to someone who wants to create a nation filled with never-ending battles for his fellow soldiers, deeply believing that their countries have no place for people like them during peaceful times. He yearns to give soldiers purpose in life, and he truly thinks that this is the best way to go about it. Now, he's ultimately the bad guy at the end of the day because of what his plans eventually mean for the world, but there's an attempt here to paint him in a somewhat sympathetic light. Whether or not it works or is actually interesting is a different story, but the attempt itself is notable. It's not bursting with detail as future games will later do, but I always loved contacting my associates and getting the 411 on enemy behavior and neat little tricks that I can do with certain items, and just shooting the shit, you know? It makes these people feel like, people I can talk to, and what's more amazing for me is that I'm getting all this from an 8-bit game. When people think about that day and age, they're probably thinking of rescuing princesses from evil dragons. Now, about the actual game. I mean, it is a game after all. Love this opening theme, man. I heard it first on Super Smash Bros. Brawl. It's called the theme of Solid Snake. Loved it then, I love it now. I can't hold similar praise to the rest of the soundtrack, but it's effective in reflecting the current situation. Sorry, Metal Gear 1, but the only thing I can remember from there is the theme of Terra, and even if I never heard of that song beforehand, the fact that it played for about 80% of the whole game certainly made sure I wouldn't forget it anytime soon. Snake can crawl now, yes, this is important. Snake's Revenge technically did it first in those 2D sections, but its significance is much larger here. It gives the game an additional layer of stealth not possible in the other two games, making for an effective method of avoiding enemy attention. But you also have a new radar system that tracks enemy movement, letting you plan your approach so that you can find a safe route and not get unfairly ambushed. Be sure to do that as much as possible because enemies are not as limited as before. They have peripheral vision this time, capable of seeing Snake from multiple angles, and they can hear you walk on certain surfaces. Thankfully, you can use sound to your advantage as well. Punch a wall to grab their attention and either walk the other way or ambush them, all without alerting the other guards. It's a fun, fulfilling way to take care of the situation. Of course, you got weapons and such, but I was surprised on how much I didn't need them. Combat isn't really the point in this game, and to jump ahead a bit here, that's going to be an ongoing occurrence for me. They got rid of the hostage rescuing in this game, the ranking system altogether actually, and I didn't really miss that mechanic. Snake's health and ammo count now increase every time he defeats a boss, and those are much better than previously. They don't go down quite as easily as in Metal Gear 1, and they're not overly poppycock like in Snake's Revenge. They're packing their own strategies and gimmicks to give Snake shit of a different kind, but you can still handle yourself within reasonability. You even get to fight a Metal Gear in full force here, how about that? Now I have a gripe when it comes to running into a boss without having the preferred weapon to defeat them. You can always exit the area and look for what you need so you can't screw yourself, but it sort of takes me out of it when I have to backtrack to a previous area while the boss probably wanders off screen. Dude, what's the fucking holdup? That sort of leads into my biggest issue with Metal Gear 2, just the amount of backtracking in general. The game is centralized around 3 areas, a standard base, a large tower, and some outdoor regions just beyond the tower. Card keys are still a major method of traveling within areas, but locating the next destination is largely a matter of finding what door opens next with your new card key. The doors are once again not labeled, and you still have to constantly switch cards to move on. The payoff's usually good. Metal Gear 2 is filled with set pieces like a sluggish tread through a swamp. You tail an officer to find the next point of interest. The higher emphasis on the story gives me a reward in the form of more dialogue, and the better boss fights are a reward in some shape or form as well. But during those times where I feel I'm aimlessly wandering, it tires me out. The game is also guilty of some of that cryptic nonsense from Metal Gear 1. Sometimes your buds on the transceiver will inform you that they're changing their frequencies for security reasons, but they won't tell you what the new number is, and there's 2 occasions where you have to decipher something they call tap codes to figure out frequency numbers to continue the plot. Again, they don't tell you how to do so within the actual game. The original release of Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake came with a chart inside the manual that allowed you to decipher hidden messages and all that, which I can assume must have been super immersive back then. But it's incredibly confusing today, so when you're playing this, get that guide ready or else you're in for a lot of frequency scanning. And then there's this part, where you have to open a locker with a special key that only changes into its required shape in different temperatures, and you need to make your way back to an area you haven't visited in a while, and then head back again once you change the shape of the key, just to open the damn door. Yeah, if you played Metal Gear Solid, that just sounded very familiar, didn't it? And there's more where that came from: an encounter with the ninja, a battle with the Hind D, a person claiming to be Snake's #1 fan while giving him advice from the shadows. There's a part where you climb a tower while being chased by guards, that damn temperature key. Solid takes a lot from this game. It's almost Metal Gear Solid Beta. And you can experience this for yourself via the re-release of Metal Gear Solid 3, and I think you should try it out. It was fun seeing the origins of ideas that Hideo Kojima would eventually flesh out in the future. I don't recommend Metal Gear 1 or Snake's Revenge, but Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is a decent game on its own accord. Don't let the limited technology and looks dissuade you. Satisfying stealth mechanics are further heightened with an engaging, yet comprehensible plot that can manage to hold your attention until the credits roll. But now I'm curious on how my latest playthrough of Metal Gear Solid will go right after playing this. Can I look at some things the same way as I did back in 1998 now that I have Metal Gear 2 under my belt? Man, that's what I love about these marathons, to see the possible evolution or stagnation of the series firsthand.
Next up in the Metal Gear Marathon, we're making a huge leap to the PlayStation with Metal Gear Solid. I find it a bit odd that a Metal Gear game was never created for the 16-bit generation, but maybe they weren't big enough for what Hideo Kojima had planned. We'll find out next time. In the meantime, thank you all for watching, have yourselves a fantastic night, and take care. Special thanks to Merchoid for the Metal Gear shirt, even though I think I may have accidentally shrunk it while running it through the dryer.